Hey, Kyle,
Hi,
how are
how
you?
are you?
Good.
Good.
Oh shoot, she didn't fix it. She said that the event is 7:45 to 10 p.m. Shit, we're gonna have everybody show up at 7:45. Here, everybody. We may have a large number of people showing up at 7:45. Apparently, the meetup got posted saying that it's gonna start at 7:45 instead of 6:45 this week. Um,
Might be an artifact of daylight savings time.
it might be. But I would think Meetup would have figured that out. Um, I don't think they would change the time of the event because of daylight savings time.
I was confused too, but I figured I'd check in at this time too.
Glad you did.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Well, this is the highlight of my week.
Oh, that is so nice of you, Mike. We love having you too. So I'm honored. That's how I felt when I started having conversations like this over a decade ago at Socrates Cafe. It was a once a month thing, and it was the highlight of my month. And I was like, I want to create more of this in the world. And so I started hosting the Socrates Cafes, and then eventually it culminated into the FTI. And I hope we've come a long way from those meetings that I used to have for Socrates Cafe and restaurants in Stamford, Connecticut. So. Um, but those were fun, and actually, the person that I met hosting those has become a friend, and I'm gonna try to go back. She's been hosting them again recently, but it's on Friday evenings, and it's a little tough for me to get there. But I'm gonna try to get to Stanford on a Friday evening to go back to her Socrates cafes, where it all started from. Although I guess it went back to in college. I had a philosophy discussion group too, so I've been doing this for a long time. But
How you doing, Garrett?
good. How are you, Joe? Good to see you.
Good.
Gonna
Nice to
make
see
you
you
a
as well.
co-host.
Cool.
Just in case we get Zoom bombers, you can take action.
Absolutely. No
Do
problem.
do offer them that I'll give them free life coaching before we boot them, but just I like to offer that just in that off chance that they may actually have the humility to say maybe they're not a really happy person and they could do better. And um so
I I very much appreciate that. Actually, I remember having that conversation a little bit with you about yeah, I'm a little bit quick on the trigger where I do make judgments a little bit um faster
not to
than
open a
either.
can of worms, but I stepped in when someone said, who am I to like they were talking about if they give money to a homeless person and they buy drugs or alcohol, they said, well, who am I to judge whether or not this person deserves resources or not? And so my response to that was, well, if you're not to judge who deserves your resources, who is? And
It's true.
like
Yeah,
and
yeah.
she really had nothing to say to that other than, well, that's not what I meant. And, I'm just saying I don't judge whether or not, and then it went down this series of Socratic questions. You guys know, like I tried to do, I was trying to listen to understand and understand where she's coming from. Like, why would you say something like this? I think these things commonly get said that like we shouldn't judge or we shouldn't take a moral stance. And I'm going to try to make a good argument tonight that we should take a moral stance, but a secular moral stance, not a religious moral stance. And I think the secular rules that I've come up with are aligned with some other secular morality, but I think a movement forward. I am standing on the shoulders of giants, although I admittedly didn't even know about those giants when I came up with these rules. But I am standing on the shoulders of giants. I'm sure that it was pervasive in society that I was exposed to these things because, it's kind of a riff on utilitarianism to some degree.
Hmm.
And utilitarianism is kind of ingrained in our society now. So I'll thank Bentham for having done that. But I hope I'm going to move the ball forward a little bit tonight. Although I don't know how many people are going to hear it since the event says that it starts at 7:45. I don't know. My
Oh,
posting person
okay.
made a little mistake. I don't know if it was a daylight savings thing or she just
I'm assuming
got it
it
wrong. I mean,
was,
but I don't know how she
yeah.
would get it wrong because it's the same time every week. So maybe it was a daylight savings bug with Meetup. Oh, I wonder if it showed it in her local time, and that might be what happened. It should show it in the Meetup time though. I'm pretty sure it shows that in the Meetup time, the Meetup time zone.
Let me see what it says. Actually, I mean, you posted a couple, I mean, obviously a few different areas,
Oh,
right?
sorry, I was on mute. Could you say that again, Joe? I was on.
Oh, you post
I
you
turned my sound off by accident.
no worries. So you posted it a few different places, correct? So
I have someone post them for me because it's very monotonous
yeah, sure.
and so yeah, I have someone post them for me. But unfortunately,
Okay.
it doesn't always get posted quite right, and so I'm talking with
I
her
see.
how to be more accurate. So
I think this really actually ought to be an exciting discussion. I do have to leave it a little early, but I still think it's going to be uh very much worthwhile because I like just learning a little bit more about Kant's ideas in general. I've been attending a couple different meetups, so about how his perception of reality and objects in the world specifically, something that we covered in great detail the other night. And that was a really great discussion. It was a lot of fun. So now we're getting to the more moral aspect of this and how he, kind of reaches those universals. But I'm very interested in the distinction between the universals and the thing in and of itself. So good, is always a good, but it's contextual.
yeah, I'm not going to go deep into Kant. I'm just going to talk about the categorical imperatives and how they sort of align with my idea of universal morals.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
yeah, so sorry if I'm not going too much into Kant, but I'll go a little bit into him. But mostly as it relates to objective morality, my main focus is going to be to make the case for objective morality or universal morality because people get allergic to the term objective morality. So I use the term universal morality because a lot of the people I meet use a tautologically impossible to meet definition of objective morality. I use what I think is the term meant by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is a moral that all reasonable people would agree with. And that's to me a very relevant bar. It takes into account what the reasonable person knows in modern society, which I think is relevant to morality. Even if you consider it objective, I consider that relevant because you have to have a context, a life worldview context within which you're viewing the lens of morality. So yeah.
I agree. I think sometimes it's easier kind of even to if it's once we like understanding Kant's categorical imperatives, it even is easy, it gets a little easier maybe to understand some of his other concepts once but I don't have that down yet, must admit. So I'm still in the learning phase for sure.
Hopefully we're all in the learning phase, so don't feel bad about
That's
that.
true. Yeah, no, yeah,
I
exactly.
don't think I'll ever leave the learning phase. Actually, the few people that are not in the learning phase are the ones that think they're perfect just how they are. Because if you're perfect how you are, you have nothing left to learn, and then you're not learning anymore. And
Right.
I joke I don't hire perfect people in my company because perfect people are just as flawed as the day they started thinking they were perfect. And in fact, they're some of the most flawed people on earth. So I only hire flawed people. I am flawed myself, and I only hire fellow flawed people. So
That's a great way of actually putting it. Yeah, I mean, it's there's I think something that is absolutely necessary in order to continue to learn is is intellectual humility. And I actually had a conversation about that a little bit earlier today. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Good to see you, Jeff.
But
Hey,
If I
Garrett.
could interrupt, Joe, I know that you were interrupted earlier. I'd be curious to hear what you were going to admit about being quick to judge. And I commend you for admitting that
yeah,
openly.
sure. No, I mean, when it comes to Zoom bombers, I admire the fact that Garrett actually is not necessarily quick on the draw, in the sense that he always gives people an opportunity, or even more admirably, actually, not only gives them the opportunity, but speaks to them about before they maybe act. So that's a that's kind of an admirable position to be in, especially if you're a presenter, because a presenter is obviously going to be distracted by those things. Whereas, in certain cases, that if somebody's continually at the same time, having a I don't know, putting up obscene things or whatever it may be, and continuously bombing, I think that in certain cases that it's, I'm not as maybe as patient as Garrett in that regard.
You're pretty patient, but it may depend on the maybe in that particular scenario, but you're pretty patient in general from what I've seen.
In general, I work towards
yeah.
it, yeah. So
Zoom bombers possibly are really people too.
They are, and
they
to
absolutely
say everybody deserves love and compassion, and the people who we think deserve it the least are the ones that need it the most. That's why I reach out to them and say, look, if you're unhappy, reach out to me. I'll give you free life coaching. And cool. And no one's taken me up on it, unfortunately, but I would be honestly very happy to help them. But there's a good book, Joe, about called Humility is the New Smart. And I really like that book because it sort of talks about how if you don't have intellectual humility, you never learn new things. And so to be smart, you really have to be intellectually humble, which to me doesn't mean like a false sense of modesty. It means like admitting when you're wrong. And so many people want to just be right, be right, be right, even when all facts lead to that they're wrong, but their confirmation bias is so strong that they won't admit they're wrong. So
yeah, and even there's a beauty in actually being wrong. I mean, there was something that I said a little bit earlier today, and I was like, that now that I was thinking through something, I was like, oh, well, maybe I did get something incorrectly. And there is that moment of, well, I wish I'd gotten it correct, but at the same time, that's the only way you grow, is that you make mistakes. And if you're unwilling to admit those mistakes or even see those mistakes, then you're not going to grow. It's as simple as that. So it's that's the process that I feel like people deprive themselves of the ability to grow sometimes by essentially not saying, oh, well, I got that really wrong. Hey, Carl, how are you? Looks like you're walking on a treadmill there.
Yeah, I'm doing my little desk walking for the day.
Nice.
Very good.
That's a great idea.
That is a great idea.
It's the only way I get to do some movement, because if not, I'm sitting on my desk for 16 hours. So it's a really great thing to be able to, because you can do the same thing. You could actually watch videos. You can be on Zoom, as long as you're not on camera, because it makes people dizzy, I think, after a while. But it's a good way to do 2 in 1 at the same time.
I always remember it was back in the 80s, is that it was Wall Street, the movie. I don't know if any of you had seen it, but with Gordon Gekko, and that he's like has a treadmill. He had a treadmill in his office, right? And I remember that specific scene, and I was just thinking to myself, it was was right around the scene where it was the same scene where he said if this one of his the guys that he was investing in, he said if he had a funeral parlor, nobody would die. And he says, you know, I'm not going to lunch, and he went onto the treadmill. So
Yeah. It makes you also think better, I think, because the blood is kind of going
Sure.
through the brain. So I think it's a really good idea for
yeah, coming out of that is even hard. Like when you actually have been sitting for 16 hours a day, or even for a long period of time. I mean, months, meaning you know, don't exercise for a long period of time.
Yeah,
The idea of getting the circulation going is actually, I think, essential.
I agree. Yeah. So who's lecturing today? Are you doing it, Garrett?
I am.
Yeah.
Although I think we're going to have a small crowd until potentially 7:45, because I think the invite got posted as starting at 7:45
Yeah.
on all of the meetup groups. So we'll be a small group, which is fine. And until then, and maybe this will be it overall. Maybe people aren't that interested in morality. I do think that I didn't phrase the title as well as I could have. But you know, I think for a philosophy community, it may have been okay, but I could have made it a little more approachable. But it might also be that people think it starts at 7:45, which is when it says on
Yeah.
Meetup. So
That's what I thought too. I was like, oh, I wonder if it's an error or if he thought because of the
yeah,
time change, but
I think it happened because of the time change. I don't know what the deal was, but the person who posted it might have, you know, she's in India, and so it might have been,
oh yeah,
they don't have the time
Okay.
change in India, and so she
Yeah.
might have
that's what it was.
something, yeah, off base from that. So
Because I noticed that when I have meetings internationally, you know, Europe changes their time differently than we do, so sometimes it's off. But that's what it is for sure.
anyone else want to introduce themselves? We haven't really done much of a social. We just started talking because it's a small group. So anyone else want to introduce themselves and say where you're coming in from and what interests you in tonight's topic?
Sure, I could start. My name's Carl. I'm based in Olympia, Washington, where it's a rare sunny day today, actually. Very rare. It rains 300 days of the year, so
Oof.
very depressing over here. And I'm not a professional philosopher, and so I'm not. I've heard of Kant, of course, and I heard of moral imperative, but I'm not really well versed in it. So I'm kind of curious, you know, to get more educated. That's basically it.
Anyone else want to go? Thanks, Carl.
Hi, yeah, this is Chris White. I can get the video on here, but it's dark in my room. Can't see me. All right.
Yeah. How are you, Chris?
Yeah, look kind of scary there. Right? Get some lights on. Okay.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm retired about 2.5 months ago, so I'm starting to look for new things. And and I think I signed up. I went to some meets, but then I got kind of busy with. I have 4 kids in college, so I got kind of busy running people back and forth. So now this thing popped up on my calendar, and nobody's home. So I had a cocktail and I joined.
Nice. I sometimes have a glass of wine, but I'm drinking tomorrow, so I'm not going to drink tonight. So, but if you're looking for, if you enjoyed the session and you're looking for some way to spend some of your spare time, reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat, because we could always use volunteers. And you know, you could maybe present, or there's other way, you know, different ways to volunteer. I always look for things to be win-win. So I'll try to understand what you want to accomplish in your spare time, and then we'll try to find some win-win way of collaborating.
Well, and you guys seem more further down the road in philosophy than I am. I mean, I've kind of, you know, I'm like, I read Will Durant's Story of Philosophy and kind of hooked up with Spinoza. He kind of became my guys. I'm kind of a pantheist, but and now I'm kind of hooked on this idea that, you know, we just need more people to be more reasonable.
Yeah.
And how you do that, I have no idea, right? I've been reading about it, trying to figure it out. Like, probably have to go to high school, but that's whatever, big state stuff. But anyway, it's crazy.
It is a crazy world that we live in, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And if that's one of your goals, I would love to collaborate on it. I have a lot of ideas on how to get people to be more reasonable. Whether or not they work at scale, we'll find out, but I'm hopeful that they will. It worked at
Here's
small
my,
scale,
I'll
so.
keep going since we got this time. Here's my little thing. Vote for reason. Like that that'll
Well,
bring us together.
Chris-
And back here, I've got some words of advice. America was founded on reason. I mean, I
Yes.
think that's the beauty of America. It was like they harnessed after the Enlightenment and the Greeks and all that kind of stuff. They harnessed reason to found a country.
And
And
in
whoever
fact,
our creator is, it's our creator's gift to us.
yeah,
And being reasonable, that's being patriotic. And just like revelation, reason leads to kindness.
I would recommend a book by a friend of mine. He just wrote it last year called The Rational Way.
Yeah.
A principle-centered guide to effective reasoning and self-discovery. He's very into rational things. So his name is Ian Mailing, like Mailing, first name Ian. I'll put a link to the book, but if anybody's interested in living more rationally, that book is actually massive, but it's really good. So I would recommend it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do a reasonable job of living a reasonable life. It's just like, how do you get more people to do it? And so, I'm kind of an ass with that approach, but I feel like we need something in high school. I would say stoicism in high school would be a good course or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stoicism and Buddhism both hold reason as the highest good. So
Yeah.
I've learned more from those two philosophies than probably all the others combined, but I learned from lots of different areas. But those two have huge amounts of wisdom because I think you're right that reason is God's gift to us. And we all have the ability to reason, and it's mental gymnastics that prevent us from doing it, or make us reason poorly, if I can put it that way.
Forgive the long, I thought I just like highlighted the link to the Amazon thing, but it's got like a whole gibberish over it. But
giving someone credit for having you promote it to us, so
yeah, I actually put something in there as well that was recently written.
Pursuit of Happiness.
Yeah, the Pursuit of Happiness. I think that's something that you would absolutely enjoy, Chris, given your comments. So
yeah, I mean, my problem is I'm about as happy as you get, but I'm trying to, like maybe you guys are trying to find ways to spread that.
Well,
yes, that's exactly what the FTI is about, by the way, is spreading, increasing happiness and decreasing harm in the world. That's the overarching goal of the organization. So would really like to chat with you if you're open to reaching out to me and ways to collaborate.
Sure.
Because I put myself in a similar position. I'm not 100% of the time happy, but I'm 90 to 95+% of the time happy, and now I want to help other people to be happier.
You're fulfilled.
What's that?
You're fulfilled and you live a life of meaning.
Yes.
I think that's what the old philosopher meant by happiness. I think more about flourishing and well-being and contentment as opposed to the happiness of pleasure every time.
Which is actually what Epicurus really meant when he said happiness. He's vilified as being a hedonist. He was not at all a hedonist. He was a long-term happiness guy. And so he's just misunderstood by a lot of society.
He just took a little more of the Buddhist approach of, maybe back off instead of dig in. But other than that, that's about the difference, right?
Yeah.
You could make a case for happiness being learning to be happy with what you have and appreciating what is, and that puts a kind of a point on your expansion of that you're extending your needs is intentional in that case, and you begin to recognize which things are really in the need category for you at any moment, and how you have a certain amount of self-training and say over that and discipline, shaping your own life. So I'd say that's a kind of a rationalist approach to taking happiness as what Kant calls it an idea, which is the idea of your being able to meet all of your real needs, not being about to confront a hostile world where you are needy. So you can take care of your needs if you have a perspective on them. So happiness is a way of thinking for him. It's more of an idea than a feeling.
Right.
Feelings are pleasure and pain. Happiness is a thinking stance towards the world as it'll meet my needs.
Absolutely.
And that gets back to the idea of actually meaning in and of itself, like so virtue, or whether you're pursuing pleasure. So that those are the kind of one of the distinctions that say the Stoics and Epicurus do have, is that they have very similar practices, and they have they're both virtue ethicists, but they change their why. And so getting back to something David had said, is I think that you have to ask yourself, what's the best way to create meaning for you? And then do you take Carl's hedonic treadmill? No, I'm just joking. Since you're on the extra treadmill as you're saying that, but or
It's actually not hedonic at all.
Well, it's short-term pain for long-term pleasure, correct?
Exactly.
So in a way, it's
happiness without disease. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
It's Sisyphusian is what it is. Is it sort of? No, not really.
So I don't know if, I'm what I'm sort of doing here is having the conversation portion before I do the presentation, only because I'm guessing that we're going to get more people at 7:45, since that's what Meetup said. And then I could do the presentation at 7:45, and then we may have a larger group. I don't know if people want to do that, or if you want me to get started, I'm happy to do that as well. So
how long is your presentation?
Yeah, I guess it's 23 slides, so probably half an hour, 40 minutes, is my guess.
So I have an idea. I don't know if you want to do it, but I don't care either way. It's an option, which is to actually do the lecture, and then when everybody comes, you kind of redo it again, in a sense, for those. So it's kind of like this will be practice.
What I could do is I could give the lecture, and I have a summary slide, and I could go through the summary slide when those people come, and just kind of give the summary level argument rather than the detailed argument.
Right.
Does that make sense to everybody?
that sounds good.
I think we should reward those that came early.
I agree. Those that realize that we're in a pattern here of 6:45 every day.
Yeah.
Every week of the year, like we wouldn't, but people who don't come regularly may not know that that's the case.
And I actually have a meeting, so I'll have to drop off, but I'll try and get back.
Cool. So I'll go ahead and get started. Let me had a bunch of you guys introduce yourselves, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, which is what I did most of my career. Now I'm an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy. I'm also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. We advertise at a bunch of different meetups, but the FTI is the organization that is behind tonight's event in this Tuesday night series. We're really looking to support and empower members to be the best version of ourselves, to seek truth, and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have events like this every Tuesday, covering topics not typically covered in academia or industry, at least not widely. And then we also have weekly members-only events to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. Membership is currently free, so for those interested, I'll post a link with more. I'll post a link of links with ways that you can learn more about the FTI in case you want to get more involved or you want to learn more about what we are about. And I'll post that now. And then we have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. Morality can be a you know, controversial topic. And so I'm actually going to title the discussion on ethics, because people get less triggered by the idea of ethics than morality, even though they're really the same thing. It just means that there's right things and wrong things to do. And yet morality typically is you know, a more controversial term than ethics. So I think if someone did a survey of, is there, you know, is there such a thing as, you know, is there such a thing as ethics, and is there, you know, is there like are there objective ethics and are there objective morals? People would probably, ethics would get a much higher score than morals, even though they mean the same thing. And so in the vein of remaining polite, you know, one good way to deal with someone who you strongly disagree with that you hear speaking is to ask them thoughtful questions about why they came to their conclusion, and try to empathize with them rather than tell them that they're wrong and why you're right. We don't learn much from that. We learn much more from empathizing with people we disagree with, and the more we disagree with them, the more that we have to learn from them. So I'll encourage people to do that. And in the Q&A portion, we'll go into sort of the rules of engagement when we get there. So so let me share my screen and we'll get started. And where is the presenter view? Here we go. All right, so and I have 3 monitors, so I'll be looking around in different directions. All right, so first we're going to talk about definitions. Always good to start with definitions about any topic on philosophy. So we'll talk about the definition of ethics and morals, although I gave the Cliff Notes version already. Then I'm going to talk about 2 hard but very specific morals that I would argue, you know, almost like, how do I say this? They, I think, very firmly meet the bar for what I call a universal ethical rule. And then I'm going to talk about 2 softer rules that I think also meet the bar for universal ethical rules. And there will be plenty of time for people to try to shoot holes in either one of those or any of those ethical rules. But I'm then going to go into why there's a, you know, whether or not there's a practical impact to any of this, and then what is a process for achieving these ethical rules, which is the 5 intentions of the FTI. So some definitions. Morals is basically the principles or rules of right conduct, distinguishing between right and wrong, and then ethical is even as a synonym in the definition of morals. Ethics is a system of moral principles, so you see they refer to each other. So they are synonyms. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has 2 definitions for morality. One is, you know, basically essentially subjective morals, that groups agree on morals or individuals have their own sense of morals. Like everyone agrees that there are subjective morals. That's not at issue in society. It's just commonly accepted not only that there are subjective morals, but most people generally think that, most people who aren't religious think that morals are all subjective and that there is no such thing as subjective morals, or even what I'm calling universal morals. Most people that are not religious would not agree with that. Most people who agree with objective morality will say that, will be religious people, and they'll say their religion is objectively moral, and that God bestowed morality upon their religion, and therefore their religion is the very definition of morality. I am the redheaded stepchild of redheaded stepchildren here, trying to argue for what I call universal morals, but is sort of, to me, synonymous with objective morals that are secularly based. And in fact, someone, I think it was Chris, mentioned his love for reason. I have a huge love for reason too, and I would argue these morals are based in reason. And I, as a long-term project, am working to do a logical Spinoza type proof of these morals from the inherent attributes of being a sentient being. I have not gotten to that. I was hoping to present that tonight, but I have not had time. I'm just very crushed in time lately. So I'm going to present as best I can what I could put together in the time that I had. So that said, I call that universal ethics, which is a code of conduct that, given specified conditions, would be put forward by all rational persons. And I'll go into how rational persons is a very well-defined term. If you think that it's loosey-goosey, I'll argue it's probably the most well-defined two words in the English language put together. And so I'll say rational and reasonable if they're synonyms, then I'll say that that's true. Some people will distinguish, but we'll get into that at that slide. So let me talk about what I mean by universal ethics. Is basically, and let's talk about categorical imperatives, because the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy definition of a categorical imperative is an objective, rationally necessary, and unconditional principle that we must follow despite any natural desires we may have to the contrary. And if something is a categorical imperative, I would argue it is also a universal ethical rule because it's rationally based. It's something that you have to follow, and it's something that therefore all rational beings would put forward. I don't know that the reverse is true, but we're mostly going to be talking about universal ethical rules. At first, I thought they were exact, one-to-one comparison, but I think actually I was able to, when I was preparing for this, come up with categorical imperatives that were not or ethical, like universal ethical rules that were not categorical imperatives. There are some like but that's kind of a little bit of that's not what we're going to be talking about, the thin line of distinction there. I'm going to talk about them both as sort of, I think the universal ethical rules that I've come up with are both categorical imperatives and universal ethical rules. And so for tonight's purposes, we can call them the same, even though I can probably make distinctions between them if I want to. So let's talk about two hard universal ethical rules. I do want to give a warning for people who can be triggered by very negative mental thoughts. The next slide has some very emotionally charged ethical rules that could be triggering to people's psychology. And so you may want to tune out for a few minutes if that describes you. That said, I'm going to introduce these, what I call hard ethical rules, which are the ones that are hard because, you have the hard problem of consciousness by Chalmers that we talked about a couple weeks ago. But this is a little bit different. When I say hard universal ethical rules, I'm talking about like, I think it was, is it Sellers, the on famine paper? He basically had like a hard moral, and basically the hard universal ethical rules are the ones that are essentially hard to argue with, quite frankly. They're so intuitively right that it's a little hard to argue with them. So I'm going to go to the next slide and you'll see what I mean. So these are two universal ethical rules, in my opinion. In order to prove me wrong, the bar is you need to provide the perspective of a reasonable person which says that doing one of these two things is acceptable behavior. So rule number one is don't intentionally torture innocent, already born babies. Can anyone just raise of hands if anyone can think of a reason that that should be okay, like a-okay to torture already born innocent babies? Yeah, I can't come up with one. So, and I should add that pose no harm to anyone, right? But even if they posed a harm to someone, torturing them wouldn't be okay. You maybe kill them if they had this horrible disease that will end humanity, but torturing them should never be okay. So the next one is don't kill someone that is innocent, that is innocent from significant wrongdoing, who doesn't want to die and poses no threat to anyone. And I will be honest, like I was a moral relativist, meaning I didn't believe in universal morals, but it never sat well with me that that belief logically entailed that Hitler was just as right as the Allies and that the Axis was just as right as the Allies. Because the things that my grandfather told me about from being in World War II and seeing the concentration camps, it just never felt right that people who did that would have the same moral, authority as those of us that put an end to those things. And so a friend of mine who actually is someone I disagree strongly with about a lot of things. We have very different political opinions, and he's an evangelical Christian. And so we have a lot of different beliefs because I don't align much with evangelical Christian beliefs. But he said, Garrett, just, we're friends. And he's actually a very polite guy and we have great conversations philosophically. And he said, Garrett, just entertain the possibility that there might be objective morals out there. And I said, all right, look, Daniel, I'm going to think about it and I'll come back to you. And I ended up writing an essay, defending that there are objective morals, or what I'm now calling universal morals, since objective moral term triggers people. And so if anyone can think of an exception to either one of these, definitely raise your hand in the Q&A portion. I would love to hear it. I have not had anyone come up with an exception to these, and I've been sharing them for some time. I actually think I've been sharing the second one for some time. The first one, someone in my meetup, and I don't know if they're here tonight. David, we'll get to the Q&A portion. We'll do the hand raise for the exceptions. But I think someone in the meetup actually came up with the torturing innocent babies one, although I added already born just to be clear of what we mean by a baby, because these days in the law, we know that can be a controversial term now. So next, I want to remind people that majority doesn't make right. And this is why I say it has to be the majority of, it has to be, actually, I think it has to be unanimous amongst reasonable people to meet the bar that I'm setting here. It has to be literally every reasonable person agrees with it, which I would argue is a pretty high bar. But if you have a majority of unreasonable people in a room, they may disagree with it. And if you get a group of serial murderers in a room and you put 10 of them in a room with one, non-serial murderer, well, 10 people are going to advocate that killing innocent people is a-okay. Like, we have fun doing this. This is what we do for fun. And they're going to say it's okay. But I like to say, suppose 3 philosophers are in front of a closed solid metal door, and 2 say the door doesn't exist, and then they try to walk through it. The door won't care that a majority of philosophers said it doesn't exist. They're going to hit their heads on the door just the same. So even if those 9 or those 10 serial murderers disagree with these morals, if we can make the stance that all reasonable people agree with them, that's a meaningful bar to set. And we should, as society, be advocating for rules that enforce, or at least I will argue that there are two universal ethical rules that are general rules. Those 2 rules are not very controversial. Pretty much all countries make both of those things illegal. So, the whole world basically agrees with them, except for David. David raised his hand and he probably has an exception. And I'm going to listen to it with an open mind. If that was what he was raising his hand about, and I might be wrong, David, sorry if I am. The people who create laws around the world agree that those 2 things are immoral, and therefore they're illegal in pretty much every country in the world, probably even North Korea, which we would argue is probably not the most just system, but it's probably still illegal to do both of those things there technically. Whether they enforce it as certain people do it or not is another story. So I'm digressing. Let's talk about rational versus reasonable. There are people who try to distinguish between these 2. I'm going to treat them as synonyms, because when you look at the definition of rational, it's agreeable to reason, reasonable, sensible. And when you look at the definition of reasonable, it's agreeable to reason or sound judgment, logical. And so they both say agreeable to reason. They're more or less, in my opinion, synonyms. Although there were a bunch of articles when I was researching for tonight's presentation that were trying to make the case for rational versus reasonable. They made good arguments using their definitions of rational and reasonable, but none of them started with dictionary definitions that showed this, which is that they're basically the same thing according to the dictionary. Now, if you want to commandeer these terms and define them in a different way and paint a distinction, A-okay with me. I'll use your definitions when we're having that conversation. But for tonight's discussion, I'm going to use the dictionary definitions and say these two are, pretty much synonyms. And so what I'm going to do is say, well, you might say the term reasonable person, Garrett, that's not a well-defined term. What does it even mean to be reasonable, right? And I get this a lot because I've made this argument to a lot of people in different philosophy circles that I play in. Well, it's actually a very well-defined term. And, in the 1837 case of Vaughan versus Menlo, I think it was Menlo, not Menlove, maybe I'm wrong. It established that the reasonable person standard is actually an objective standard and not a subjective standard. So the idea that the reasonable person, what a reasonable person agrees with, is, by law, I think that was a case in England in common law, and it's basically considered an objective standard, not a subjective standard. And so if you do what the law deems a reasonable person would do, you're pretty much okay. Self-defense, defending your life when your life seems to be at risk. Even if you kill someone defending your life, it's considered what a reasonable person would do, so you're fine. Because everybody needs to be able to defend themselves. So if you do something that, a reasonable person would say is unreasonable, you can get in trouble. And so pretty much all case law has talked about this. Oh, I'm not reading my slide notes. I should really do that, shouldn't I? I did prepare all these slide notes. So if basically estimates range in the number of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of cases, that each of which, says a reasonable person in this one of tens to hundreds of thousands of cases, a reasonable person would do this in that scenario. So I don't think you can find any other definition in the English language that has all these different specific scenarios that define what does and does not constitute that specific two words in the English language, applying and not applying, that were scrutinized so carefully as a lawsuit scrutinizes, with so many terms of engagement. The law, while I will say the justice system is not always just in my experience, the law is trying to be very careful about bringing about just outcomes, at least for, to the best of the ability of a system that has some inherent flaws. And so that said, it is a really, a really well-defined set of two words. So next, let's talk about some axioms. I'm going to try to make a logical case for the more general first rule. And these are the more interesting ones, since the two that I said so far probably aren't too controversial. But these may be more controversial, but I'll argue they're also more useful because there aren't that many people going around trying to torture innocent babies. So, and trying to kill innocent people who have done no significant harm. Like, that's not super common. Does it happen? Yeah, it happens. We put those people in jail and, we move on with our lives. But it's generally the exception, not the norm. But these general rules actually apply to all of us in, and I guess the second one applies to all of us. The first one is the, what I would argue, the more important and required to be legally enforced one. And what I'll say is, we all want to be protected from significant unnecessary harm. And I'm going to say I'm going to make the argument in the next slide that that's tautologically true when you see my definition of harm in the next slide. And so bear with me if you don't agree with that for the next slide. And I'll also say, acting as if we're behind Rawls' veil of ignorance, which basically just means, for those not familiar with Rawls' veil of ignorance, what that means is that you should act as if you could be anyone in society. That's my layman's term way of putting it. So you shouldn't say, just because, like a white supremacist would say, because I'm white, I should be able to, harm Black people because I think I'm genetically better than them, right? That might be an argument. But actually what Rawls' veil of ignorance says is, you couldn't know how you were going to be born. And when you act, you should act as if you could be any member of society. and therefore, you know, that is not a, you know, even though there are many arguments to use against that argument, I'm just giving an example that is brutally obvious, which is that you shouldn't, you know, take your even misunderstanding of a perception of privilege and use that to, you know, to do something that would be unethical, because you might be causing harm to, you know, if you're behind a veil of ignorance, you don't know who you're causing harm to and you don't know who you are. And that's what the veil of ignorance says, is you don't know your own, you have to act as if you don't know your own, you know, sense of privilege that you might have in society. And so I'll argue that is a moral and ethical way of living. I'm going to say Rawls probably did a better job defending that than I will. So I'm just going to use, you know, stand on his shoulders tonight and say, you know, if those two things are true, then, you know, my first universal moral or ethical rule would be true. So let's unpack significant unnecessary harm. So significant harm, by that I mean harm that would be punishable by law. And so the harm has to be identified and defined by the person being harmed. So for example, a masochist who likes pain might get hurt, but they enjoy being hurt. That's because they're a masochist. They may be hurt for fun because that's what they enjoy. Not going to judge. I'm not a masochist, but I also don't want to be in a room with a masochist that follows the golden rule, because he or she might think I like to be hurt and I don't. So if someone isn't conscious, then we use a reasonable person's definition of harm to decide whether or not they're being harmed. So I like to give all the caveats, and I try to come up with, you know, and I've had conversations about this, so I try to cover all the bases. So significant harm means that it's a harm large enough that if a person caused that kind of harm, and the person who was harmed brought them, you know, a lawsuit against the person that caused the harm, a jury of peers in the presence of a court of law, with everything, you know, around the legal system and the, you know, et cetera, assuming that the case proceeded without technical errors or mistakes, would find the harm causer worthy of punishment, meaning you caused so much harm that you should be punished by the law, by a jury of peers, for doing what you did. A simple example, killing someone is significant harm. You know, a simple example of what's not significant harm, someone cuts you off while you're driving and you scream out the window, "You're a jerk." That's not significant harm, right? You called someone a jerk, but, you know, I don't recommend that. Road rage isn't a good idea. You never know who that person in the car is and if they have a gun and who knows what. But let's be honest, like, we all make mistakes. We all get frustrated sometimes. And, you know, we flip someone off on the car or whatever. And if you do that, that's not a significant harm, that if you were put in front of a jury of peers and the guy that you flipped off tried to sue you, like, he's probably not going to win that lawsuit, right? So that's what I mean by significant harm. Unnecessary harm is a harm that doesn't prevent a greater harm. And so if a reasonable person would agree that the harm is significantly likely to prevent a greater harm, then I would call it necessary harm. So for example, I see a school shooter shooting school children and I have a gun. I'm going to shoot him. And yes, I'm going to harm him. I might even kill him, but it's unnecessary harm because it prevents those school children from being shot. And Buddhism says cause no harm. Stoicism, there are, I forget, the medics in Stoicism said, first, do no harm. But I think that if you talked with an expert in either one of those philosophies about this principle, they would agree that there are certain harms that are necessary. In fact, you know, there were, you know, there are lots of historical examples where you could find exceptions to that. And when I talked with a Buddhist monk, I thought Buddhism might be an exception to that, where they say truly, like, don't ever do harm. But when I talked with a Buddhist monk about this, he goes, "Garrett, look, you know, the general rule is do no harm because that's the message we want to get out. But if it comes down to it, yes, this kind of necessary harm does make sense in Buddhism and is justifiable." So let me just talk about the argument real, you know, I guess it's not going to be super quick. There's a lot of text on this slide. Sorry for that. But basically, we all want to be protected from significant unnecessary harm. If the rule is that we're following Rawls' veil of ignorance, then you imagine that if the person is suppose that there is some type of class of person that is privileged enough to cause significant unnecessary harm without punishment, then there are two possibilities. Well, there are two possibilities, but actually only the first one is actually important for the argument, but I'm going to give both anyway, because the second one might be worth noting. First of all, if you are a person that is a member of the class that can cause significant unnecessary harm, according to Rawls' veil of ignorance, you still can't cause the significant unnecessary harm because you have to act as if you're coming from a veil of ignorance. So you can't even acknowledge you are a member of that class according to Rawls' veil of ignorance. So from Rawls' veil of ignorance and the fact that we all want to be protected from unnecessary harm, you can basically make an argument that this rule number one is logically defendable. That said, the second case was if you are not a member of that class of people causing significant unnecessary harm, that class of people can cause significant unnecessary harm to you. So you would much rather say all members of society have to be bound by this rule that we must all, avoid causing significant unnecessary harm whenever possible, and prevent other people from causing it whenever possible, because that protects us from significant unnecessary harm by not allowing any class of people to be able to cause it. As soon as you allow any class of people to be able to cause significant unnecessary harm, you expose yourself to that significant unnecessary harm, which undermines assumption number one, or really axiom number one. I think it's fairly axiomatic by definition, which I didn't point out specifically, but the tautological part is that someone has to say they're being harmed, which means that they, are saying that they don't want that behavior, and therefore by definition, if they're harmed, in a significant way, they don't want that because that's the definition of what harmed means. And so clearly we all want to be protected from things we don't want to happen to us, right? That's by definition true. So basically, we can show a contradiction in both of these things, and therefore it's true. So what I would argue is that this rule should be legally applied throughout the world, quite frankly, although I'm going to scare all of the conservatives that think a new world order is coming. I'm not trying to bring about a new world order here, but I am trying to bring about ethical rules that I think should apply to all of humanity. And I do think that everybody should be protected from significant unnecessary harm in all cases, full stop, like no significant unnecessary harm in the world. And simply getting every human being to agree with this and to only elect into positions of power people who agreed with it, and only allow people in the court system who agreed with it, would radically change our society and our world for the better, in my opinion. Simply acknowledging that this is a universally agreeable rule would have a radically positive influence on the world. And so I want to put it out there and say, look, this is, for me, so easy to follow and understand, and it should be enforced legally across the world. And it should always be enforced before the second rule that I'm going to come to in a moment. Do feel free, if you can think of an exception to this, preventing significant unnecessary harm, raise your hand in the conversation portion, and I would love to hear potential exceptions. Maybe I haven't thought of something and I need to put more caveats in the rule or put some other rephrasing of it. That's fine too. We will get to the questions after the full presentation. So definitely feel free to put your hands up, but I'm going to call on you after the presentation because that's what most people have asked us to do so they can follow the full logic of the presentation. So let's go to rule number 2. That's rule number 1. Again, we always follow rule number 1 first, and then we'll go to rule number 2. Rule number 2 is that we should increase happiness and decrease harm. I'm going to be really specific about what I mean by this. Happiness is not a well-defined or agreed upon term, so I'm going to define what I mean by it. It's really the feeling that one gets from achieving one's goals in life, whatever they may be, so long as they don't cause significant amounts of unnecessary harm. You probably expected me to say that, since I said rule number 1 is more important than rule number 2. So you can, try to accomplish whatever you want. And if that accomplishing those goals or even striving to accomplish those goals brings you happiness or you get a feeling of satisfaction from that, cool, strive for that. And then I would argue we should decrease harm. I've already defined harm well, I hope. And then what I do is I talk about happiness and harm over a lifetime, and the happiness and harm that we experience over a lifetime given our decisions. And so I'm going to introduce a term called TNPP. Sorry, I have a little redundancy in this. I borrowed some slides from another presentation. And so I'm going to introduce TNPP, which is I'm going to start with NPP, which is net present positivity. And what that means is from this point on to the rest of the end of your life, whenever it may be, take every decision you make and everything that happens to you and measure how happy that thing, the happy things make you and how much harm the harmful things cause you. Now subtract the harm from the amount of happiness. Mind you, there's going to be a conversion factor between harm and happiness because we try to avoid harm usually more than we like happiness. Although, you'd have to create some translation factor between how much harm and which types of harm. But let's just imagine we solved for all those little problems. And now we're getting more people because it is 7:45. So just to let people know that are coming in, we had a little mix up and the event was posted for 7:45 instead of 6:45. We always start at 6:45, so apologies for that. The person who posted the event posted it at the wrong time by accident, probably because of daylight savings, because they're in a country that doesn't have daylight savings time. I will summarize the arguments at the end of the presentation, so I'm just going to finish and then I'll summarize the arguments at the end so that for the people who join late, you'll get the essence of it. You'll just get the very short version. So so we take within your life all of the things that make you happy and cause harm to you. We create a factor that translates that happiness and harm. And then over time, we create a discounting rate so that the further in the future that happiness activity and that harm activity happen, there's a discounting factor so that like something that will make you, happier 10 years from now, like that thing may not come to fruition. We may not live 10 more years, right? So we don't know what's going to happen. And so there's a discount rate where the value of happiness and harm, the further out you try to track it, is reduced. And then if you collapse that into a number that says my current net present positivity is X number, then that's the overall amount of net present positivity you have. And you can compare, roughly between making a decision. Say you're in college and you feel like studying causes you harm. Well, if you think that studying will get you a better job and, have, better relationships in your life after college, then maybe your net present positivity is higher, suffering that harm of studying that you feel like is harmful, and you'll actually study a little bit in college, but at the same time and basically a person who only focuses on the present moment might say, well, I don't enjoy studying, so I'm just not going to study in college. And then they fail out of college, they don't get a good job, and suddenly they're not making enough money. That money doesn't buy happiness anymore, which is about 100K a year. It's 95K a year in 2023 dollars, or maybe 2022 dollars. So around 100K a year now, probably. So hopefully that's clear with net present positivity. And then total net present positivity is if you take the net present positivity for all the people you can influence with a multiplier where there's 100% multiplier for yourself and then 0% for someone you have no influence on. And then the more you can influence someone, the higher the percentage, the closer the percentage is to 100. And basically the idea is you should try to maximize total net present positivity so that you're increasing happiness and decreasing harm for the effort you put in the highest amount possible. Because, let's face it, if you can barely influence someone, you know, I've had this thought because, you know, I used to be a runner and I used to run on concrete. And then someone told me, hey, Garrett, if you run on concrete, you're going to blow out your knees and your shins. And I'm like, oh, I'm 20 something. I'm invincible. I'll never blow out my knees and shins. And then one day I blew out my knees and my shins and I had a dark 2 months of no running. I had run consistently for about a decade. And now when I see runners running on concrete, I'm like tempted to say, hey, you shouldn't do that. It's going to hurt your knees and your shins. But I can't influence this person. Like, what do they care what I say? I'm the guy on the street. And, you know, and so trying to influence that person is probably not a good use of my time and resources. The chances are they won't listen to me anyway. And so that's where total net present positivity prioritizes the people who are closest to us, which if you read the on famine, I think it was Peter Singer paper, he basically tries to make the argument that, you know, if you want to do good in the world, you should donate all of your money to causes that will give the most good to people that you right now have no significant ability to influence. And I would argue that that doesn't feel inherently right to us in our gut. A lot of the times people tend to rebel against that philosophy, although I applaud him for making the argument. It made me think a lot, but I also didn't feel like that was the right ultimate answer. Whereas I feel like the TNPP argument accounts for the fact that we all have this inherent connectivity to the people we're most connected to now. That still doesn't mean we shouldn't connect to more people. We should, and we should create more positive relationships. But TNPP takes into account the relationships we have and the fact that you know, we can influence some people more than others, and that we should influence people you know, for the positive that we have relationships with. So I would argue that the goal of rule number 2 is to increase TNPP with our decisions after we followed rule number 1. Now, ways to increase TNPP, we should empower other people who increase TNPP and watch who's doing it and who's not. We should disempower people who reduce TNPP. In doing so, we actually indirectly increase TNPP through others' decisions by empowering people who increase TNPP and disempowering people who do the opposite. So this also, for the people we can influence, if we help increase the TNPP around us of the people we can influence the most, those people can usually influence us the most. And if we increase the sphere of influence of the people who are closest to us and they increase our sphere of influence, we can actually influence more people. And so this creates a positive synergistic effect where by helping each other, and I have a saying, which is if we don't help each other, who's going to help us? And I would argue by helping each other, we increase both of our sphere of influence as long as we have the noble end, which is to help, you know, all the people we can ultimately influence. And as we increase our sphere of influence, we can do more good in the world by influencing more people to a positive effect. Now, is there any easy set of guidelines to follow that increases TNPP in our sphere of influence? I would argue there is. It's called the FTI's 5 intentions. And so one is a devotion to using reason and intuition to be the best version of yourself, to seek truth and to be fair. And these are in priority order. You notice I tend to do stuff in priority order. That's how I work. I do everything in priority order. I'm a prioritizer. And then 2 is transparency and open-mindedness. You want to be transparent about who you are and what you believe to the extent you trust someone, and have an open mind when other people share ideas with you, and even reflect on your ideas with criticism. Have an open mind that other people may have ideas that help you achieve the first intention, which may help you come closer to truth or to being fair or to being a better version of yourself. Number 3 is a commitment to critical thinking, where you want to increase your ability to distinguish fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. You want to better think critically so you can take all the facts and data, understand where they're coming from, you know, so that you can see the truth more clearly, because critical thinking helps us in our pursuit of the truth. When we can think critically, we actually can make a better sense of all the observations we make. And doing so helps us see the truth more clearly, and seeing the truth more clearly helps us be more fair and be a better version of ourselves. So number 4 is to maximize happiness while minimizing harm. We just talked about that tonight. I would argue there are the two rules in this rule number 4. There are two sub rules that have to happen in priority order. And then number 5 is an eagerness to give and receive love. And actually, I've added since then to give, receive, and reciprocate love. I would argue that some people don't have enough giving and some people don't have enough receiving. And really, giving, receiving, and reciprocating is what I think we should strive for when it comes to love. And yeah, so I'm gonna skip actually. So I will, for philosophy geeks, I'm going to go into a little bit of how this ties into other philosophies. So when you're making a decision, what matters is the intention in the action. So while I said I'm kind of riffing on utilitarianism, utilitarianism is generally called a consequentialist philosophy where you're judging morality based on the consequences of the decision, not the intention. I actually think what matters is the intention because none of us can control the consequences, right? Like I may see a person that's running in front of a car and, grab them and, try to stop them from running into the car, but a rock comes from above and kills them. And actually, if they'd gone in front of the car, it wasn't going fast enough that it would have killed them. And actually, I ended up killing them accidentally. Did I do a horrible thing? No, I really tried to save their life. And I think that was, the right thing to do because that's what I observed. I didn't see the thing coming from, the rock coming from above. Really, this is not a consequentialist philosophy like utilitarianism. It's much more based on Bayesian epistemology, which I talked about in my presentation on epistemology. It wasn't last week, sorry. This is a slide from another presentation that I reused. It's more of a riff on deontology, ethics of care, social contract theory, and utilitarianism, with a bit of virtue ethics thrown in, which is the 5 intentions or the virtues that I advocate for. And I'm really trying to take the best of all these different moral philosophies and put them together into a couple of simple rules that, if you follow, really the 5 intentions are the simple rules, and these 2 ethical rules are the core of what you're trying to accomplish. But the truth is, if you don't see the truth clearly, you will end up causing harm when you think you're creating happiness. And that's where, I'll give an example I used to give this example when I was a moral subjectivist about how all morals are subjective. I read about this in, I think, the Museum of Natural History. There's a set of tribes in, I believe it's in like Southeast Asia or Australia. Someone will remember where it is. Someone remembered last time. And basically, in these tribes, the tribes all have a common belief that anyone who I'm trying to remember which the point that I was going to make for this. Let me not go down the digression because we have limited time and we're almost at 8 already. So basically, I don't think we should, be judged on things that we can't control. I am a practicing Stoic and practice the dichotomy of control. And so I try not to worry about the things I can't control. And I have a pithy saying to remember that, which is don't stress, just do your best and accept the rest. And that means do your best to do the right thing, which is, in my opinion, following the 5 intentions. And, accept the rest, meaning you can't control what the consequences are. All you can do is the best you can. And once you've done that, don't worry about it because you've done the best you can. If you haven't done your best, try a little harder and then feel that you've actually done your best. And then once you feel like you've done your best, then great. And we all have to pick and choose, like how hard we try in each situation. We don't want to use all our energy on a trivial thing. So I'm gonna skip that for lack of time. And how can this help us in life? I think it'll help have healthier friendships, better working relationships, because you'll be helping friends and colleagues. And we actually have a process for facilitating a new friend circle in the FTI. And I'll share the FTI links again because we had a bunch of people join at the time published on on Meetup, which I apologize was not the time that we started, but that was some confusion. Let me put the link in the chat. And then better family ties, same thing as work relationships and healthier relationships and better community relationships for the same reason. And I would also argue it'll help us be better citizens to elect politicians who subscribe to this theory of empowering citizens through having altruistic politicians that want to empower people rather than control people. I would argue that there's a big problem where the people who seek power are the ones that tend to want to control others, and usually those are the people who lack control in themselves. We should do another, I don't remember if I've done a presentation on power. If anyone remembers that I have done one, let me know. But if not, I'll do a presentation on power at some point. I'm just giving the Cliff Notes version, but I don't want to digress on that. But let's talk about how impactful this can be. I think this could be really impactful if everybody followed these 2 ethical rules. I think we would drastically increase the happiness in the world and drastically decrease the amount of harm in the world, especially the amount of significant unnecessary harm by pretty much banning it from the world as a whole. And so that said, I think I'm going to quickly recap for the people that joined at the time posted on Meetup. Again, I apologize that the Meetup was posted at the wrong time, but I basically went through 2 hard ethical rules and basically said that the bar tonight of creating an ethical rule of what I call a universal moral. And again, I'll give a caution for anyone that's triggered. Don't read the slide that's part of the slide on the left, and don't listen to me for a minute if you're easily triggered by trauma. But basically, the hard ethical rules that I would argue every reasonable person would agree with. And by the way, for anyone who wants to raise their hand to say, Garrett, you're not right about one of these ethical rules, your bar is to present a perspective that a reasonable person would agree with that says doing one of these basically doing what inherently seems ethical or unethical is actually a-okay according to a reasonable person. And so you have to give a reasonable person's perspective that says doing what seems unethical in these ethical rules is acceptable. So one is don't intentionally torture innocent already born babies. So if someone can find a reason that torturing them is a-okay from a reasonable person's perspective, share that. If you can't come up with a reason, then you would have to agree that some universal morals or ethical rules exist. Number 2 is don't kill someone who doesn't want to die, poses no threat to anyone, and is innocent from significant wrongdoing or has never done anything significant that's wrong. And again, significant meaning according to a court of law. The soft ethical rules are don't cause significant amounts of unnecessary harm and prevent others from doing so whenever possible. And then 2, increase happiness and decrease harm, really increase TNPP, which is the amount of happiness and harm that people in your life that you can influence will experience throughout their lives, with the most important person being you, but very close behind that are the people you can influence the most, and that those are usually the people you care about the most. You want to prioritize those you can influence the most, the highest, but you want to ultimately help as many people as you can influence to the extent you can influence them. So that said, that's the end of the presentation. We started a little late, but late for a little after 7, so we went a little longer than 8, but I'm going to take questions now. I will ask people if you could write in the chat, was this helpful? Did you learn anything new? I always like to know that for people. Also, I'm going to try to get the survey. We like to ask for a survey. I actually forgot to read last week's survey results, so if I didn't respond to your survey results from last week, I apologize. I will get to that. But I will also ask people to fill out a survey tonight. And so let's start with Val. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot one thing, Val. I want to give the rules of engagement for Q&A. So please limit comments to comments and questions to one comment or question at a time per time you raise your hand. You can raise your hand as many times as you want, but because we have a bunch of hands up, we want to go one comment or question at a time and limit the length of time that you talk to 2 to 3 minutes. Just so we can get through everyone's questions. If we have no hands up, you're welcome to talk more than that. And then if you want to respond to what someone just said, whether it's me or the person who's talking, I'm going to engage with people so that they feel listened to, so that they are listened to and not just feel listened to. Like if other people want to respond to what they said, feel free to just jump in. I'll let you go most of the time if you talk at the same time as me. And if you're asking a clarifying question, it should be on the same comment or question that was brought up by that person who raised their hand, not be bringing up a new topic, and keep it to 20 seconds or less if you're commenting on or like asking a question or making a quick comment on what someone just said. So that said, those are the rules of engagement. Val, go ahead.
Thank you for those extensive rules. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to remember all of them, but I'll try to keep to 2.5 minutes.
Perfect.
I was originally engaged by your first slide, which was talking about the majority vote on issues. And this brings up the issue, of course, that, everybody has a different idea. And we might have, at the worst, we might have what I would call the Zaphod-Beeblebrox effect, right? Like whatever's most popular might get voted in. And this is kind of the problem of the ancient philosophers, right? Like, should we let the plebeians make the decisions? And I agree with you, Garrett. I think that is definitely a good direction to go in. I absolutely agree with that. But, at what point, are we imposing our own views on others? And at what point do we end up in, Mad Max Thunderdome? And then I listened to your, your talk about the NPP and the TNPP systems. And, I think what you're trying to come to is a place of compassion, empathy, kindness, and also balanced with critical thinking. And in my opinion, that's a balance of right and left brain. You have to kind of foster that. It's not going to be a system. It's going to be cultivation of not just the intellectual realm, but the emotional. Does that make sense?
Say it again.
It's not just intellectual. It's a cultivation of the intellectual and emotional realm.
Yes.
Compassion, empathy, kindness. It's not a set of rules. I mean, it could be a set of rules, but it doesn't come from there. It doesn't spring from there, and it's not something you can enforce on other people. I mean, you can try, but then you're going to end up defeating your own purpose. So I'm not sure if I reached my time yet, but I have a lot to say. I wrote some notes down, but
if you don't mind, Val, I would love to respond to those two because you kind of brought up two things and we want to keep it to one per hand. So if you don't mind, let me respond to those. And then if other people want to respond, they can. And then raise your hand again. And then I would love to hear more of your notes after that, if that's all right.
That's fine. Go ahead.
So you said, what right do we have to impose our values on others? I would argue preventing significant unnecessary harm is something that we should. I think all reasonable people would agree with that. And unless someone can find a reason a reasonable person wouldn't agree with that, we should be imposing that. In fact, we very often do already by making murder illegal, right? That's a significant unnecessary harm by making assault illegal. Well, we do have the right to impose our values on other people to prevent ourselves from significant unnecessary harm. If we don't, then more people will suffer significant unnecessary harm. And if we don't want to impose any values on anyone, we should just throw away the whole law book. And I don't think you would agree with, that, or I don't think you're proposing that we should do that, Val. But I'm just, I had a conversation earlier today with someone on a WhatsApp group I'm a part of, and that was kind of the conversation that went down. She said something similar to you, which is, why should we impose our values on others? But I think, there's a point at which we do need to impose them, but we need to make sure we've thought carefully about what those values are and that they are universally agreeable. And if they are universally agreeable, then I would argue we're justified in imposing them on the non-reasonable people. who may want to kill us. So, or other people. The second thing you said is cultivate emotional and intellectual. I agree with that completely. You know, I try to be very rational. My saboteur is being hyper rational. And so I do err on that side, but I care very much about people's emotions. And I do think that you have to balance between the two. We had another conversation on emotions another night, and so you could check out that video to see more about my opinion on emotions if you care about it. As far as not forcing things on people, I think we do with the law. We force things on people, and that's okay. So that said, David, go ahead. I'm sorry. Did you have anything you wanted to say in response to that? Val?
Are people going to respond?
Yeah, if anyone wants to respond to either me or Val, you're welcome to. Hearing not, David, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, you've made many points. So it's sort of hard. I'll try to focus in one area. And I think it's a matter of the whole foundation that you're trying to establish. I think it's not really set down on the ground yet. I think you can see the flaw in where you always have to say, in a court of law, a bunch of reasonable people. And you know, well, in a court of law, a black man was going to die in America. That's the way courts of law work. So we know a court of law is not an objective standard. So reasonable people means what, you know, kind of feels in my culture reasonably. That's not an objective standard. So we're having a problem with the ground, is what I'm saying. And I don't think it's just, well, we're getting smarter and we're converging on some objective morality. That's not objective. That's what would be called anthropology of morals. What does this group do? What does that group do? It's an empirical study. That's not objective in defining morals. So I think this clarity is important to say there's an objective morals. Along the way here, I want to point out, I think in your values, 4 or 5 values you have, you're missing one key value. Look at the great traditions, the great masters, Kant, Confucius, whatever, Jesus. See what, that's not in your values. That should be there. Study what has been learned. They've done a lot of work. Don't start from scratch. It'll help clarifying. For example, you said you're writing a paper to objectively ground, you know, in reason, morals. Don't hedge on the definition of objectivity. Rational proof and deduction, complete revealing of all premises, and a solid deductive approach that's not hedging on the meaning of words, okay? And that's been done, by the way. So you don't have to actually do it. Kant did this in the 18th century in the European continent. So it's really worth finding out that this has been done. There's a grounding in pure reason of how we have to make our decisions. And you're coming up with a lot of great stuff. Intention, of course, deontology, I don't like the word. Intention is where it's at. Your decision is where the morality is. What you try to get done, what you carry out, good luck. But you know what you're trying to do, and no one can judge it unless they know what your reasoning is. They can say, well, he didn't do very well. They're judging your effect. Fine, that's not the morality question. So the reason for the action, that's what I'm saying. The proof of the rationality being based, rationality as the basis of decision-making, objective, universal, and absolute. There's no question. This has been proved. So you don't have to do it. It's, you know, it's worth reading. The groundwork of the metaphysics of morals and the critique of practical reason. No question. So it also clarifies the role of happiness. So in fact, it's not just the categorical imperative. I'm done. It's not just the categorical imperative, but what it means to have that as a ground for your decision. There's no higher ground, lower ground. It's the reason you're doing what you're doing. So you're missing like infinitely many practical rules. You have 2 good ones. I can't argue with torturing babies. I mean, it's ridiculous because there are infinitely many good rules, but the categorical reason behind them
Right.
is
So
how they're
the two general rules are the ones that are more important. I agree with you that
Importance,
the
it's
specific
absolute.
ones are not that important.
Not importance, it's absolute if you understand the categorical imperative.
Well, the two morals that I put forth, I think, are categorical imperatives. I would argue both of them are. And Kant, actually, I have read Kant, and he said that being honest was a categorical imperative, but he also gave the counter example to his own argument, and he tried to firmly say he was still right in spite of this. And I joked with my kids about this. We actually we did a little had a conversation, and I told my kids about Kant and the categorical imperative and how he said everyone should be honest. And I said, well, what Kant said was that you know, if an axe murderer comes to my house and says, where are your children hiding? I'm supposed to tell him where my children are hiding. Does that make any sense to anyone? No, I'm not going to tell him where my children are hiding. I'm going to go, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any children. Go to the next house, and then I'm going to go call the police.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually understanding his argument. That's presenting without understanding his argument. You understand?
But he gave that
It's-
example, David.
To exactly show you what the way of thinking of it is and isn't that will make sense. And you're exactly getting the opposite point of what really comes out of the categorical imperative.
Well, yeah, I think real quick, and this is the only thing I'll say is I think David's kind of getting to like Kant's. He would say, yeah, it's wrong to lie always because of the to lie when it benefits you leads to a conceptual contradiction and a contradiction in willing, and that's in chapter 2 of the set of the groundwork for the metaphysics and morals. So that might be
say that. He can say
And
that.
Garrett,
I just disagree with him.
Garrett, the answer to what you just why your example is actually an example. You're not willing to lie when you lie. You're willing to lie. It's not the imperative. The imperative is to save a life.
That's what I'm saying, is that preventing significant unnecessary harm is the imperative. The imperative is not to be honest. In fact, Kant had the imperative wrong. And all I'm doing is trying to get the imperative right. And it's preventing significant unnecessary harm. That's the imperative.
You're confusing the material of the reason being chosen from the imperative of the reason being chosen. The imperative to save life was what the person is choosing when they speak to lie. You don't choose to lie. You choose to lie because it's subordinate to an absolute demand that you save life. So that's the reading of it, that he's correct on the ontology and the metaphysics of the situation. It makes it very simple. But I understand how people read, oh, you have to tell the Nazi where the Jews are. No. But if you choose not to lie, you're doing a moral choice. That's what you're trying to do. But in that situation, if you know what's going on, if you know the intention, you wouldn't choose to do that. You wouldn't justify that. You would choose to save a life.
And why? Like, wouldn't that be because preventing significant unnecessary harm is more of a categorical imperative than being honest?
It's a categorical imperative.
What's that?
There can always be another categorical imperative. You have to choose a universal law.
Right, but that's what I'm saying, is being honest, I don't think is a universal law.
Not if you're speaking to murderers. You're right, because
No,
they're not rational.
I'm speaking to parents. I'm a parent. I'm not going to tell an axe murderer that comes to my house where my kids are hiding. Are you kidding me? Are you a parent, David?
I missed what you're saying. You asked something bizarre. I missed it, whatever you asked. What did you ask?
My understanding of what Kant's example was is, suppose an axe murderer comes to my house and asks where my children are hiding. He said you should say where your children are hiding, because it's important that you be honest in all situations, no matter what. And he felt strongly that that was a categorical imperative. But that doesn't feel inherently right to most of us. He came up with his own counterexample.
That's a misunderstanding. That's a child level understanding of the categorical imperative. That's not
It's his example, not mine.
I know, and I think you aren't.
So you're saying Kant was a child about his own categorical imperative?
Representing the point of the imperative. If you
I'm
said,
just I'm just reiterating Kant's example of, you know, what he said was a categorical imperative.
look, here's what you're doing.
I don't want
One
to.
thing. Yeah, just Garrett, Newton believed in little angels and spirits. If you quote the silly stuff Newton wrote, you miss the point of his science. Please look at the structure of what Kant proved, not an example that looks twisted to you. Look at the structure and what it really implies, okay? I
I
think it's
love Kant, David. I love Kant, and in fact, I'm supporting him tonight. I'm saying
good.
he just had what the specific categorical imperatives were incorrect, and I'm trying to correct for that. He said that being honest is a categorical imperative. I'm saying preventing significant unnecessary harm is a categorical imperative. And unless you can come up with a counterexample where you should cause significant unnecessary harm, you should agree with me. Now, that said, I don't want to keep going on this. We can come back to it if we want, but I will tell you I have a lot of notes on the critique of reason, pure reason, and I forget the other book, but
Was about objective grounding, not that example. Objective grounding is something that's been worked on. It's worth using that framework if you want to do that, which you said you did. That's my point.
I didn't say I didn't. And in fact, the leadership team and I are working on curriculum on the five intentions and how the five intentions, you know, aren't, while they may be an original reworking of a lot of historical ideas, they're all grounded in historical thinkers from, you know, ancient Greece onto ancient Greece and China all the way up to the modern world. So we are working on that. It's a work in progress. It's not done yet, but stay tuned. There will probably be a fee for that one, but we got to pay the academics. So they deserve to get paid for their work. So Carl, go ahead. Thank you, David, for your comments. Appreciate it.
I had 2 points, actually 3, just in quickly respond to David's
Yeah.
idea about subjective. And I'm not again, like I said in the beginning of the meeting, I'm not a professional philosopher, more of a practical one in life. And to me, my definition of universal is when everybody agrees on something, like there's not one disagreement. So I think, Garrett, your example of the baby, or, you know, murdering innocent people, pretty much like nobody can come up with an exception. Therefore, it is universal to me, and therefore objective. So that's that. The second point I wanted to make was about the veil of ignorance, because I remember when I first came across it, I didn't really quite understand it or wasn't able to grasp it. But until I heard somebody give an example that I think pretty much made it so simple, and I think everybody would maybe change their view on it, which is the pizza thought experiment. I don't know if you've heard this before, but the thought experiment is pretty much you've been invited to a party and you've been asked to bring a pizza, and you've been told to cut the slices equally among 8 guests. The veil of ignorance is that you don't know whether you'll be the first to grab the piece of pizza or the last one. And so the idea is that if you're the last one, you will make an extra effort to make sure all the pieces are equal cut. Whereas if you know you're the first one, you might maybe cut a little bigger for yourself. And I thought that was such a brilliant and simple way to understand the veil of ignorance, which is like, if you don't know what you're going to be in the future and you've been told to create the perfect society, you will make an extra effort to make sure it's equal and fair for everyone. So I thought that was
a great
great
example, Carl, and it reminds me of my childhood when my brother and I would argue who gets the bigger slice of cake, and my parents would say, well, one of you cuts and the other one chooses. And
There
so we
you go.
actually used that in practice, and you know, I
Yeah.
didn't realize that it was the veil of ignorance at the time, but it kind of is.
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to give it up to you.
Thank you.
you.
Great example. Appreciate it. Octavio.
Well, I have to say that I agree with your good intentions to promote happiness, but I think you know, in this argument that you're talking about with Kant, is that if you believe in law, according to the law, we should give up the Jews to the Nazis, because if you don't, then you're a criminal, and period. So that's how I believe in this specific example. The same goes for the children analogy. And I think that we can take care of ourselves. We don't need a book of laws. And I believe in natural compassion. And I think that the language we should use should be changed. For example, from moving from punitive justice to restorative justice. That's my belief. And I also have a question for you, Garrett. How would you deal with manipulative politicians that want to use intention in order to control?
Okay, so you mentioned a bunch of stuff. I missed the first one. Sorry, because I had family yelling and I hadn't asked them to stop yelling. And so the first one, thank you for agreeing with the intentions. As far as we can take care of ourselves, we don't need a book of laws. I don't think humanity is at that level yet. I hope that someday we will be. I think that while I think what I heard you say is that we're all inherently good, and I think we are, but I think a lot of people confuse no puedo hoy por la noche, te amo princesa, sueña buena, mañana por la mañana. I think that so sorry, my daughter's going to bed. We usually have our philosophical talk in the evening, but she forgets that it's a Tuesday night. So still not quite there yet. So in terms of day of week and schedules. So I think that unfortunately laws are still necessary because you have a lot of people that want to do what they want and have a disregard for other people's health, safety, and happiness. If everybody literally followed the 5 intentions and those 2 general ethical rules, and everybody truly followed them, then I don't think we would need laws, Octavio. But we're not at a point where everybody does those things. And in fact, there are a lot of people, thank you, Val. We're at a point where a lot of people need to learn those things and need to learn that there is a way to treat other people with humanity, respect, acknowledge both their emotions and their reason. And I think emotions are reason based, to be honest. Like, we have emotions for a reason, and we can reason through why we have those emotions in the first place. And that was kind of the Cliff Notes version of my presentation on emotions. And I agree with you that we should change from punitive, and you said the word restorative justice. I would say reformative justice, where the Nordics have done this really well. I forget which country in the Nordics did it the best, but they drastically decreased their crime by basically making prison about creating a more positive set of emotional or like ties with society, and basically looking at how can we reincorporate this person back into society in a way that they have a good job. And instead of saying you can only be and I'm in the food industry, so a food delivery driver, I think you can do that if you've had a criminal record, but think of how many things you can't do if you have a criminal record in the US. And by doing that, we basically prevent the job opportunities for people who have gotten into trouble, and we make it harder for them to reincorporate into society by having a punitive justice system. I'm digressing a bit, so I agree with that. And we had another presentation on
I'd like to respond to what you're saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm hearing that you don't respect the law entirely, that you're okay with being a criminal under certain circumstances.
Why did you hear that?
In the thought experiment of the Jews.
What's that?
In the thought experiment of the Jews, you're saying that you would not respect the law and be a criminal and not give them up to the Nazis.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I was in Nazi Germany, I wouldn't respect the law. And to be honest, like, if the law told me to do something super unethical, I probably wouldn't do it. But I ultimately feel like, the law is not my ultimate judge. My ultimate judge will judge me after I die, and I'd rather have my own conscience on my side and feel like I'm doing good in the world than have followed the laws that were set up by some politicians. And you asked the last question, that's a good lead in into your last question, which is how do you deal with manipulative politicians? Although you said that want to use intentions to control, I would argue the 5 intentions actually prevent no puedo, busca de mami. The 5 intentions actually prevent politicians from being able to manipulate people, because if you have good critical thinking skills, it's very hard to manipulate you. And if you don't have good critical thinking skills, it's really easy to manipulate you. And if your goal is to seek truth, it's much harder to manipulate you. If you're listening with an open mind to other people, it's much harder to manipulate you. So the 5 intentions are intended to create resiliency against manipulation. Carl, did
Let
you
me
want to talk?
explain.
We don't do the
Yeah, very,
hats off thing. You just speak up, but
very,
go ahead.
yeah,
Let
just a
me
very brief
let me
response.
explain what I was saying.
Sure.
I just wanted to briefly respond to the thing about Germany, because there were a lot of families that broke the law and hid Jews. So I just wanted to say that felt that it was unethical. So that was proof right there.
Well, ethics has to do with the individual's accruement of common sense. You know, it's so, you know, so to say that it was something very obvious isn't enough, because a person's ethics is informed by themselves. And let me explain what I was trying to say is that, for example, using your example, Garrett, if you push somebody to their death, that's a horrible thing that happened. Even if your intentions were good, it's still horrible. You still pushed somebody to their death. And I think you know, people should take responsibility for these types of things.
Mm.
Yeah, what
That's
I was saying is if you prevented someone from being like pushed in front of a car that was speeding towards them and they ended up dying because of something that you didn't know about, you know, like maybe someone shot a stray bullet is a better example. I said a rock falls on their head, but that's like, you know, a Looney Tunes version, right? So say there's a stray bullet that by preventing them from jumping in front of the car, they end up dying from a bullet to the heart. Well, you couldn't have expected that a stray bullet from a gunfight, like, you know, 3 blocks away was going to hit that person. Like there's nothing you could do to have prevented that. You still did the right thing by preventing them from jumping, you know, from preventing them from being pushed in front of a car.
I'm
And I
saying
agree with
that
you. It's still horrible that they died and they're going to die in your hands. And that is still horrible.
And-
But, you know, you can't live your life saying, well, I'm not going to stop this person from being pushed in front of a car because maybe they'll get hit by a stray bullet from 3 blocks away, right? Like that's not how we, you know, we don't want people to live their lives thinking about that. And quite frankly, this is a contrived example, but it happens all the time in the US in healthcare, where you have people who, you know, you have physicians who do test after test or run a procedure because they don't want to get sued for not running the procedure, even though the procedure may not be necessary. They're afraid they'll be sued if they don't do something. And so in order to prevent the lawsuit or a possible lawsuit, they do things that they probably wouldn't do, you know, normally.
And by the way, that is the trolley problem. And there's been hundreds and hundreds of different variations that actually change people's morals about it based on those little tweaks. So it's very fascinating for anybody who doesn't know it, the trolley problem.
David, go ahead. Good to see you.
Hey, yeah, it's interesting. Carl just brought up the trolley problem, because the trolley problem is a huge problem for any kind of categorical or, you know, actually, the first comment I wanted to say is interesting, Garrett. You mentioned you'll be judged after you die or something like that, as though there's some judge going on afterwards, which is against the whole idea. He wanted to come up with a set of rules that you don't need to have a judge, you know, like a God kind of judge. The idea being categorical imperatives. Everyone follows them. That's the way to do it. But the trouble is they're not practical, because you've got the, you know, telling the axe murder, you've got children. So categorical imperatives are pretty useless in the real world. But I think your intentions are more useful, but then they suffer from the trolley problem, because I think number one, no torturing babies. I say no torturing anyone. But what if torturing one saves 1,000? That's the trolley problem that Carl alluded to, that it always makes absolute morality difficult, because you can come up with thought experiments whereby most people would agree, well, nobody likes to torture one person, but if it saves 1,000, yeah, you know, that's where the tough part comes. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
So
Can I say something?
yeah, go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, this is where I think a lot of people are being deceived by their politicians, because torturing or murdering one person will not save anybody. I guarantee you. As a matter of fact, they plan to do the opposite. Because the truth is that God said the punishment for killing an innocent person is death. And that is why Kamala Harris said, what you do to one, you do to all, and I'm one. So yes, I have been tortured. I have been maligned. I have been slandered. I have been hurt. A lot of things have happened to me that were completely unjust. And the only reason they happened is because they wanted to see how society would treat a very moral, innocent woman. And now that everybody showed their true colors, now they have every reason to go after the public, and that is the only reason they did it. So no, it will not save anybody. That's their intention, was to get everyone to turn on me so that they could get rid of all of you, because the truth of the matter is that it's about God. And if I've been following God my whole life, which I have, and I've been innocent, then they want to see if everyone else follows God or their conscience, or they want to see if everyone doesn't have the protection of God. And now people have exposed themselves to the point where they may not have the protection of God.
But,
I mean, expose their character. I mean, their character. That's what I'm saying. Their soul, you know.
I think the basis of this discussion on morality is, if there is no God, how do we run things? Not God will punish us or not punish us, or, you know, I think this discussion is sort of what Garrett set up, is the idea of categorical imperatives, or you know, the absolute morality is what Garrett's trying to get to, but it's not based on judgment from a higher power. Although then Garrett did say, well, I'll be judged after I die. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
so if I could jump in and try to handle this conundrum that was just brought up between Lauren and Lauren, I'm really sorry to hear about what you've gone through, by the way. But if I could come in, I am trying to make a logic-based argument for morality, so a secular argument for morality. I personally believe we'll be judged after we die. That's my personal belief. I think I can logically defend that too, although David won't be convinced because he doesn't agree with my argument defending free will. But for those that came to that, that did believe it, then I can logically defend that we will actually be judged after we die.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I agree with that. I agree with everything in the Bible. Well, most everything in the Bible, I agree with, and I agree with the 10 Commandments. I agree with Revelations and Judgment. I posted all this on my Facebook. You know, I've pretty much followed all of God's commandments my whole life. That's why I celebrate the Sabbath every Friday night and light the candles and say prayers to God. I'm constantly singing praises to God. And I've done a lot of good to the community my whole life. I've done tons of volunteering and helped others. So, I mean, I've lived an upstanding life. So this is why, like, I can't just comprehend or understand how a politician could get everyone turned against an innocent woman. That's kind of like what Hitler did when he spread propaganda to get people turned against Jews in particular. And then he went ahead and killed not only Jews, but other people as well. And, you know, this is where people who think for themselves and have true morality wouldn't be swayed by lying politicians who don't even believe in morality or God.
Yeah, Lauren, can I, with what you're saying, I don't think we have any disagreement whether you're using God as the standard or reason as the standard. I think we should be able to get to the same ground. Okay. But what we're going to call reasonable, how are we going to determine? If someone's going to go to a book and say, look, here's what it tells me, we're going to have trouble reasoning with that. So Garrett's trying to say, let's also show how reason gives you the same principles that your religion would be teaching you, right?
Right. And I would argue, Lauren, like if you look at the 10 Commandments, they're about, you know, most of them are about minimizing significant unnecessary harm or increasing happiness and decreasing harm. Not all of them. There are some that are, you know, not, but the general gist of the ones that are more intuitive to us today are doing those things. And so I would argue that you know, I think that you can, ground morality in a secular way that will resonate intuitively. And I think, David came up with the example of, well, you can come up with an example where torturing one innocent person, will save huge numbers of people. But we had a presentation that I gave on thought experiments, and I tried to make, and I think I made a pretty good argument that thought experiments that have no basis in reality are not very useful thought experiments. And in fact, I gave really good examples of how they can lead you to come to absolutely the wrong conclusions, where I made really obvious examples that led you to come to the wrong conclusion because of the thought experiment, simply because of how unrealistic the premises are. And that's where I'll agree with Lauren that if the thought experiment isn't realistic, then it's actually, serving the opposite purpose of achieving wisdom. It's achieving misunderstanding more than it's achieving wisdom.
Yeah, I agree with you, because they've done psych experiments where they asked people to shock a person. They said, okay, we're going to tell these people, these experimental subjects, to shock this person, and they're going to see that this person is in pain, and they're going to ask to be continuously shocking them. And some of the participants wouldn't do it, and some of the participants would. And they wanted to see, would someone, let's say they were being paid or something, would someone be paid to do this to someone? Or would someone refuse the money and not do it because they have their morals, and this is kind of a similar experiment. So, people are showing their true colors, I guess, what they're willing to accept or what they're willing to compromise in their morals. And, and then what's the end result of that? If a whole community or a whole society turns evil towards an innocent individual, then what does that say about the society?
Thought experiments highlight troubles or problems, and they can be very realistic. I mean, of course, the babies and 1,000 babies, that maybe isn't real. But the point is not the babies. The point is the trolley problem. And the trolley problem, is just the simple, it's not clear cut what you should do in some situations when you've got these categorical imperatives that, like the example of people or of Garrett not telling the axe murderer that he's got kids. I mean, so he's going against Kant's categorical imperative, and there may be instances where even Garrett's two very strong, you would almost say absolute rules for living, but the trolley problem, there could be a situation where there is more harm done, even though it's not fair to the person. One person's being harmed and the other, a large group benefit. So it's not fair to that one person. But if and so that's the conundrum of morality. Is it, should we say nobody gets tortured and everyone suffer, like 1,000 suffer, but the one person doesn't? Or do you say it's a cost benefit analysis, and which a categorical imperative shouldn't be? Kant didn't want it to be a cost benefit analysis. He wanted it to be an absolute rule. But
okay. First of all, my question is, who told you that one person suffering or dying would help the collective? Because I don't know if you've been paying attention, but what's going on in the world today is a lot of violence, a lot of chaos, a lot of mayhem. And I don't believe that me suffering is saving anyone, honestly, because the truth of the matter is that everybody is being subjected to this end times or New World Order agenda. So there's really nothing to be gained from it. I don't think whoever told you that was telling you the truth.
Well, no, are you aware of the trolley problem, Lauren? Because I mean, this isn't a thought experiment, which Garrett doesn't. Sometimes some thought experiments don't really don't reflect reality. But trolley experiment does reflect a problem in ethics or morality of the idea of practical considerations versus absolute rules. And the trolley, maybe Garrett, you could talk about the trolley problem just so
yeah. So if I could, I actually think that my first ethical rule solves the trolley problem, at least the basic trolley problem, because the trolley problem, Lauren, if you're not familiar with it, is suppose there's a trolley that's out of control going down the tracks, and you're standing in front of a lever that can switch the trolley to go a different set of tracks. If it goes down the existing set of tracks, it's going to run over 5 people, but if you go down, you press the button and it switches the track, it'll kill one person. And should you switch the track and be theoretically responsible for killing one person, or should you let it go down its trail and, its normal path and kill 5? Well, for me, if you don't want to cause significant unnecessary harm, for me, inaction is a cause as well. And by not taking action, you're causing 5 people to die. And given if you don't know anything about the 5 or the 1, if you know that the 1 is going to save 5 million people, that's a different story. But if you don't know anything about the 1 or the 5, you're better off, pressing the thing. Although I saw recently on social media a solution to the trolley problem, and it came from the trolley engineers, and that was, you press the button, you press the track switcher when the trolley is halfway through the changer, and you derail the trolley so that it screeches to a halt and doesn't kill any of the people.
You're not allowed to do that.
That's my answer to the trolley
You're
problem.
not allowed to do that in a thought experiment. The trolley experiment, you're not allowed to change it.
What do you mean not allowed?
That's not
Wait,
kosher.
It's outsmarting the people who came up with the problem. Sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
People
I have-
die.
I have some wisdom to share about this situation because I saw the post on my ex's Facebook about the train that was going to either hit these other 3 people or hit this one person, or maybe hit other 5 people or whatever, and then hit this one person. But he also posted that he was going to either whether it's kill me first and then my family, or kill my family first and then me. We were all going to be killed. And then once he gets the money, he's going to go ahead and kill the rest of the world. So
it's a non sequitur, Lauren. I mean, it doesn't follow the thought experiment.
I know, but the reason I'm telling you this is because if the collective, like all of you, or even people listening to this video, are all thinking something that's false, then what you end up doing is making bad decisions. So, for example,
That's what we're ironing out is what's a good decision. That's what this.
And that's what these 2 rules are intended to do, is to say what's a good decision. And I do want to get to Val again, because she has her hand up. But that's exactly the intention, is if we prevent significant unnecessary harm to everyone, to me, that's a good decision. And if we increase happiness and decrease harm for the people we can influence, over the lifetime of ourselves and those people, that's another good decision. But that said, let's go to Val and see what she has to say. There are a bunch of hands up and not a lot of time left.
The trolley problem, you're
Okay,
still
I will,
right?
Sorry, did we miss someone?
you guys aren't
is it my turn to
understanding.
speak yet, or no?
You guys didn't understand anything I just said. You didn't understand
Okay,
anything.
Lauren, I want you to know that I believe you. Okay, I believe you, and I also want to say, what is critical thinking? Let's define critical thinking. Is it only intellectual? Is there no emotion involved? Does one take critical thinking only as an intellectual experiment, a thought experiment? I think thought experiments are fundamentally flawed. They lack a lot. They lack empathy, compassion, kindness, and understanding of what another person is coming to. And in the end, I would call that a lack of critical balance in what you define as critical. You're just approaching it from one side.
Yeah,
there's no, it's like it's not whole. And it's like, you can't just make everything statistics, numbers.
Can I just respond? Can I just
respond?
Okay,
no, you're fine. I'm gonna cut off.
No, I just want to return to Val, to that comment, because Val makes a valid point, but I just wanted to add that the trolley problem has been studied rigorously in psychology just to see the differences at the brain level. So it is very connected to reality and emotions and compassion, all that stuff. So just a very brief example of one thing where if you have to do the switch where you have to pull the switch and it kills one person instead of 5, around like 70-80% of the people would do that, right? When you have to push a fat person off the train that would then kill only one person or 5 people, suddenly it goes the other way around. it goes very little amount of people would actually push someone to show you the emotion that's involved just by changing that one little thing.
You
right?
understand,
This
it's
one,
a psychology problem, not an ethics problem. It's taking us way off base here.
but it is connected to ethics.
Yeah, it
It
goes
is.
way
It
How
is
you feel.
studied. It is studied,
that-
David, as a moral conundrum. So
Definitely
ethics and
lacking
morality are really
in-
synonyms. So
Right.
And to
Yes,
answer Val's question, to answer Val's point, you have to assume the emotionality of the one person who would be killed or the 5 would be killed.
Right.
You have to assume their emotions are they want to live. You know, you are taking you're assuming they all have equal desire to live. You're not saying, well, that guy, the one guy, he doesn't look like he's having a good life. No, you're just saying they're all equally, you know, emotions are huge. It's actually the basis of the trolley experiment is to assume everyone wants to live.
I'm going to leave with this one statement. Critical thinking is not just about the intellect. If you want to have true critical thinking, you have to balance the other stuff.
We
I
agree.
agree with you, Val. You need to have a holistic perspective to be a real critical thinker. You need to consider people's emotions as well as the facts at hand, because the logic and facts, you know, we're human and we have emotions no matter what happens to us. And that doesn't mean we should make emotional decisions. I don't think we should make emotional decisions, but we need to consider what the emotional ramifications of our decisions are. And that's what TNPP is it's considering the holistic effects of how happy you're going to make someone and how unhappy you're going to make them, the kind of harm that you're going to cause to them, both emotional, physical, psychological, all aspects holistically. So yeah, so I agree with you, Val.
That person wouldn't be even considered a hero if he pressed a button. It would be considered a tragedy.
Well, it's a tragedy either way with the trolley problem. That's why, you know, I know that it's a super studied problem, but I do find it a little bit unrealistic, but you can create similar realistic scenarios that really are trade-offs between one person and 5. And so
Can I say something else? Because
I think that you either respect the law or you don't. Sorry, go ahead.
can I enlighten people on something? Because I feel like a lot of people are having misinformation.
you can, if you're on the same topic, go ahead.
You mentioned something about a fat man on a train or something and you wouldn't push him off. But do you understand that there could be a person like a fat guy or something who's manipulating everybody into thinking that if they just kill me, that everybody will be saved or 5 people will be saved? But that's actually 100% false. So what I'm
in the
saying,
trolley problem, it's not false. In the trolley problem, the fact
okay. Well, I'm talking about reality. I'm not talking about a thought experiment. We're talking about critical thinking here. What I'm telling you is that in reality, with the world and reality today, that is all false. So what I'm saying to you is that I could be standing in the gap like Esther in the Bible, who stood in the gap between the violent mayhem and the people. And if they get rid of me, there will be no one in the gap. So they will have free range on the people.
So, Lauren, that the trolley problem has been studied also in terms of other, as Garrett said, different situations. Like there's been one where the doctor has to choose between killing an innocent, healthy person who came in for a checkup because he's got 5 organs that will save 5 people, and he has to decide. So there's a lot of variations. It's like, you know,
but why are the 5 people sick? Why are the 5 people sick?
You've never heard of people who need organs?
No, but are you talking, when you're talking about the 5, are you mentioning my family members or something?
Well, that could be, that's one of the areas that gets switched. Like if one, like people say, well, no, if I was the doctor, I would not. But if it's a family member, I may. You see, it's all about how does it change the morality of people. And what I'm saying, it's been studied in a real level. It's not just a thought experiment.
Okay, so why would people be telling me that my family's all alive and well if they are needing organs?
I don't think I understand your question.
Well, What I'm saying is you never know anything. You can't make a proper decision and you never know love unless you know truth. So if people are not willing to speak the truth, then nobody's making good decisions.
We agree. But again, I think that's a non sequitur as well.
It's not really a non sequitur because it affects people's decision-making process in this entire situation.
Right, but we agree with what you just said.
Okay. So if people, including my family members, would just be honest and we could have a discussion, then this probably wouldn't be happening, you know, and also the collective may be safer if we all discuss the truth instead of, you know, pie in the sky thought experiments that have no reflection on reality.
Right, but we're trying to correct one slight misunderstanding, is that the thought experiment is not just a fantasy. You keep thinking that it's a fantasy, but it's not, because it's applied to real life problems.
Okay, you keep thinking that somehow my family is going to save humanity if they kill me, but that's actually false. That's actually 100% false.
That's not what I'm talking about at all. Forget about the family, forget about that part of it. We're just talking about the thought experiment that is not as fantasy as most people think it is, because it's been studied.
Yeah, I mean, it's like kidney, you know, it's like they only have so many kidney dialysis machines. So who do they give the dialysis to? Old people who are almost going to die anyway, or to young people who
Actually,
that kind of thing.
Give more clarity. I mean, I remember during COVID, when they were interviewing Italian doctors who had to choose who's going to die. So that was real life.
Yes, exactly.
Right there, 3 years ago. 4 years
Yeah,
ago.
there were limited ventilators, for example, and they had to choose who to give the ventilators to.
And they had to come up with a rubric of who dies and who doesn't.
Yeah, it's a cost benefit analysis, which is
let's go to the next. Let's go to the next person, if that's okay. Peter, go ahead.
Why did Kamala say what you do to one, you do to all?
I don't know, but that's worth exploring, actually.
Because it's not a no. That's the fact of the situation. What you do to one, you do to all.
Okay, I agree with that.
So you shouldn't even be talking about killing a healthy person or killing someone, because what you do to one, you do to all.
Okay.
It's just not
yeah, it's just a thought experiment. It's just a thought experiment. That's all it is.
Well, you know what? In terms of
I'm trying to enlighten you.
I'm sorry.
It's not real. It's just a thought experiment.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, the whole discussion seems a bit hypothetical. I mean, like the trolley experiment. I mean, as some of you guys said, it's totally dependent on like the guy who has the lever is hungry, or whether his family is involved, or blah, 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 blah. There's 1,000 factors, you know, which determine the outcome of this experiment. So it's and we see this in psychology experiments. You know, if you do the same experiment with hungry people, or like late in the evening or in the morning, you get different results, you know. And so I'd like to go back to Garrett's original question: how do we maximize happiness or satisfaction, or whatever you call it, you know? And the problem I see is it's not just like these yes or no answers. I mean, we're living in an interconnected world, you know. And so whenever you buy a banana in a supermarket, you make a moral decision dependent on whether, you know, you think about the ecological consequences of that banana, or child labor, or
now we got the banana problem.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's much harder. And the problem is these days, I mean, we can make moral decisions when we deal with people, you know, but we actually make much more far-reaching moral decisions by just consuming or not consuming certain things. And I think these days that's equally important, given like our impact on the world. I mean, somebody said before, I forget what it was, but like, we don't have any impact on the world, which is of course not true, because every freaking time we buy something, we make moral decisions, and we have an impact on the world. That's why we have climate change, because everybody's driving in their cars and stuff.
Right.
The reason we have climate change is the New World Order agenda. That's what it is.
It's personal consumption. That's the problem. I mean, it's
can you
just
define, Lauren, can you define a New World Agenda?
the elite want to have a one world government, and it's going to be a one world global totalitarian control.
Well, that's
And
a
so-
conspiracy theory.
No, it's actually reality.
Well-
Have you ever heard Obama speak in front of the United Nations about it? It's the truth.
Well, of course, there are corporations which try to make as much money as they can, which is because there are stakeholders who have stock and stuff, you know. And so, as long as you're in the stock market, as long as you have a
We're at 9
401k,
o'clock, guys. I would love to continue this in the online community if we could.
Yeah.
You know, I do want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Next week we're gonna have a Socrates Cafe because the person who was originally going to speak never got back to me, and I actually don't have his contact information. I waited a long time, probably too long, to get get the contact information for him to reach out to me. But I guess I don't even have their email anymore. So
Wait, Garrett, do you have an opening tomorrow, next Tuesday?
yeah, do you want to present?
Yeah, I could present the self-actualization next week.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
I will make that happen. Actually,
Garrett, I've got a quick
Yeah.
one. It's a yes or no answer to you. Have you got time for it?
go ahead, DLJ. I know you joined late, but I think you kind of missed the argument.
Yeah, so I missed the argument. So are you arguing for objective morality, and yes or no?
I call it universal morals, morals that would be agreeable by all reasonable people. And the first one is that we should not cause significant unnecessary harm to anyone, period.
That's not a yes or no. So yes, yeah, right.
So
Yeah, okay.
I would call that objective
reasonable
morals,
people, I
but
think that's
I would
reasonable
call,
people.
I would call an objective moral a moral that all reasonable people would agree with. If you would agree that that's the definition of an objective moral, then yes, I'm arguing for objective morals. If you think objective morals have to be morals that have no human judgment involved whatsoever about whether or not something is moral or not, then no, I'm not arguing for objective morals.
So
yeah, the key. What do you mean by reasonable? But yeah, thanks for the answer. Cheers.
I answered that, but you weren't here. So reasonable person is the most well-defined two words in the English language. So thank you all for coming. Hope to see you guys next week. Do fill out the survey if you can. Appreciate everybody's comments, conversation, and would love to continue the conversation in the online community. Julian posted a link to it, and then if you go to the FTI links that I posted to learn more about the organization, if you like the 5 intentions that I mentioned, those are the values of the FTI. And as members of the FTI, we work and help each other basically bring those values into our daily lives and help each other achieve goals, and it creates a new friend circle for everyone. So for anyone interested in that, check out FTI membership, which is I'll put the link in one last time before we close out. Where is it? Here it is.
Excuse me, Garrett. I just put another link there for anybody who wants to keep chatting. If they're in chat mood, there's another meeting happening in about 1 hour, which Juliet's Positive Psychology. If anyone's interested, if that's all right to give her a plug, Garrett.
Of course.
Anybody keep chatting, it's a very good, friendly group.
Anything that facilitates good, meaningful, intellectual conversations, I'm a full supporter of. So I have no, it's funny, some groups get very proprietary. I got kicked out of a group for, for mentioning that I was going to have an event on emotions at the FTI. And I was told I wasn't allowed to share links, so I didn't share a link. But I said, oh, by the way, I'll have this event. And then, I got kicked out, and it's like, well, I was following all the rules that I was given, but they didn't want any other organization to ever be mentioned within their group ever. And I'm not that kind of guy.
Sorry to cut you off, but could somebody,
such a rule breaker. Sorry, Octavio, go ahead.
Somebody could also start another Zoom. If anybody has a Zoom account, somebody could post it and we can continue the conversation. Sure. If not, I have one. Here, I could start one.
You can post one if you want. It's an after party for those that are interested. I'm happy to have you post one if you want, Octavio. I'll give a minute for people.
I'm not able to. So if somebody else would like to post it on the chat, I'd be willing to attend.
You know what? Actually, Lauren, Lauren, if you're interested, reach out to me about maybe having a conversation about the new world order topic another night.
Yeah.
Okay, can I message you on Meetup? Are you?
Yeah, you can do that, or you can email me. I put my chat. I'm also curious. I would love to do what we call listening to understand, so that I can pick your brain and understand, you know, why you believe that, and maybe we could analyze some of the data that you have that convinces you of that, and we could look at it together.
Okay, that sounds good. I would do another Zoom, but I don't know if I want to give a Zoom link to a whole group of people. I mean, if someone else wants
No,
to.
you don't have to do it now. Just reach out to me, and we'll set up for another night to do it together. I'm not gonna stay, like, if there's an after party, I'm not gonna be able to make it because I sleep really early and it's already past my bedtime. So, yeah, but
Okay.
but
Are
yeah,
you are you in the West Coast or?
I'm on the East Coast.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I don't sleep that early, but I do sleep early, but it's 9 o'clock here, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Garrett. This is Jenny. I came in late. I'm sorry, but.
Could I
Thanks,
just
Jenny.
add real quick that those who are still here, next week's talk on self-actualization is right on point with the FTI's 5 elements. I'm going to be arguing that if you actualize every single individual on the planet and put him on an island, you will have an automatic utopia.
Okay.
Thank you, Carl.
I'd argue we can still
So-
be,
Okay.
as long as we all, you know, get actualized, I think we can still
Yeah.
remain together and have a utopia, to be honest.
Well, that's what I will argue as well, that you can actually educate people and actually self-actualize every single person on the planet.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the
Small
FTI is
goals.
about. So
Yeah, there you go. So we're
very
right,
aligned.
same wavelength. Yeah.
They like decide to be
Such an easy goal.
It's
So
an
I do
easy
have to-
goal.
I
Just
do have to
Carl,
shut down. I've
tune in,
been
tune in. I'll have a great presentation.
right.
You're
Yeah,
very
trivial,
practical, Carl,
right,
very
David? So
Sounds good.
so thank you, and look forward to that next week, Carl. I'll move
See you
you from
next
the
week.
date that you're on now to next week. Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope you
Take
can
care.
make
Thank you,
Carl's
Garrett. Thank
event
you.
next Tuesday.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Nick.
That was a great group. I appreciate everybody.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.